The first sound through the phone wasn't crying. It was something past that, a ragged, broken heaving, the kind of noise a person makes when a wall they'd built their whole life around finally caves in. "Who did you call?" my sister whispered, like saying it too loud might make it more real. "Mom just saw him walk in. She's on the floor, Claire. In front of everyone." I was sitting in my driveway, engine off, still in the apron I'd worn for 2 straight days of cooking, 25 minutes from the house where all of this had started. I should have felt something close to guilt. I didn't, because what happened in that living room didn't begin that afternoon. It began 18 months earlier, with a phone call my mother made absolutely sure I never knew about. "Welcome to the quiet reckoning. I'm Claire, 34, a tax accountant who walked away from a downtown firm to build something of my own from a card table and a laptop. My family had a different word for it. They called it unemployed." This is the story of one birthday party, 2 days of non-stop cooking, and the single note that finally brought my mother's carefully built world down around her. If you've ever been the one who holds a family together while nobody notices you're the one holding it, stay with me. For 7 years my life ran on rails. Alarm at 6, coffee in the car, the long crawl into the city, the fluorescent hum of Whitfield and Company. Tax season migraines. Client dinners where I smiled until my jaw ached. 18 months ago, I stepped off those rails. No breakdown, no dramatic exit. I simply got tired of pouring myself into someone else's company when I could build one of my own. My new office was a studio apartment above a laundromat, but the desk by the window was mine, and so was every hour I spent at it. That particular Tuesday, I was knee-deep in quarterly numbers for a florist client when my phone buzzed. Not a customer. My sister, Hannah. "Mom says you'll handle my party this weekend. 50 people. She says you're free." I held the phone away from my ear, not out of shock, out of familiarity. This was simply how things worked in our family. My time got handed out like spare furniture nobody had asked permission to move. But Hannah was turning 36, and before she was my sister's keeper of secrets and shared closets, she'd been my best friend. So I told her yes. "I'll cook, but I need real help. Tables, decorations, cleanup. I can't carry the whole thing myself." "Of course," she said. "Everyone will pitch in." I wanted to believe her. I told myself I did. Looking back, that was the same trap I'd been stepping into since I was old enough to hold a wooden spoon. I drove to my parents' house Friday evening, a canvas bag of knives and spice tins riding shotgun. The house hadn't changed. Same flag on the porch, same lawn my father mowed like a Sunday obligation. He waved from his recliner without getting up. "Hey, kiddo." That was the full extent of his greeting before dinner. My mother was on the phone in the dining room, using the voice she reserved for people outside the family, warm, polished, performative. She was telling someone from her church committee that the books for the fundraiser were right on track, that she'd been keeping everything organized herself. I'd done those books for 3 years. Every reconciliation, every line item, filed under her name because the letterhead said hers, not mine. She hung up, turned, and didn't say hello. Instead, she slid a 3-page handwritten list across the counter. Appetizers, 3 entrees, a tiered cake. Enough for 50 people. This wasn't help. This was full catering, unpaid, already decided without me. I started cooking at 7 that night and didn't stop until after midnight, marinating, kneading, shaping dough for the next morning's rise. My father wandered in once, asked if I needed a hand. I said yes. Could he chop onions? He'd taken 2 steps toward the knife block when my mother called him into the living room to watch a rerun of the church renovation footage. He mouthed an apology and left. I chopped the onions myself and let people believe, for years, that the tears were just from that. By midnight the kitchen was spotless and I was not. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, where my CPA certificate sat on a shelf coated in a fine, undisturbed layer of dust, kept, but never once looked at. 5 a.m. came hard. I was downstairs before the house stirred, juggling 4 dishes and a half-dozen timers like a kitchen air traffic controller, a skill I'd earned the hard way, working line cook shifts in college to pay for my CPA exam. Hannah and her husband, Marcus, arrived at 10. She came through the door in fresh clothes, carrying a bottle of wine and a gift bag. He carried nothing. She hugged me carefully, mindful of my flower-streaked apron. "Smells incredible. You're so talented at this." Then she asked to shower first. Neither of them came back. I carried 6 folding tables and 50 chairs out to the yard alone. Later I found Hannah curled on the couch, scrolling her phone, shoes off. I asked for help. "Mom said you had it covered," she said, not looking up. At 2 o'clock I found my mother in the dining room, arranging carnations in mason jars, the one task she'd claimed for herself all weekend, humming a hymn while she trimmed stems. I told her I needed Hannah and Marcus to take over the dessert prep. I'd been on my feet since 5. "Hannah has a stressful job, honey. She needs to rest this weekend. I have a job too." She looked up then and gave me the smile she always gave me, not cruel, worse than cruel. Pitying. "You're the only one without a real job," she said, the way you'd state that water is wet. Obvious. Barely worth mentioning. Then she went back to her flowers. I stood at the sink afterward, gripping the counter until my knuckles went white. I'd heard versions of that line before, at holidays, in passing, wrapped in concern. Never this bare. Never used, so plainly, as the reason I alone should be sweating in a hot kitchen while everyone else sat in the shade. That was what burned. She wasn't being cruel. She believed it. It was simply how the math worked in her world. Real job, rest earned. No real job, none owed. I picked the knife back up. By Saturday evening, every dish was finished, foiled, and chilling. The cake stood 3 tiers high, waiting for its final coat of frosting. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop, not for the party, but for the church's capital campaign ledger. 3 years of entries I'd built, reconciled, and defended to the audit committee under my mother's name. It had started small. She'd taken the chairmanship, told the committee she'd handle the finances personally, then called me 2 days later asking for just a simple spreadsheet because she wasn't good with computers. The spreadsheet became a chart of accounts. The chart of accounts became quarterly reports she presented herself, using language I'd written for her. My phone buzzed, a text from Walter, the church's treasurer, a retired bank manager who double-checked his own grocery receipts. "Helen says the books are in order for review. Confirming the committee meets in 2 weeks. I typed back that I'd have the report ready. His reply, "Thank you, Claire. Helen speaks very highly of your help." Help. I read that word 3 times. 3 years, a dozen reports, and I was still just help. Late that night, I stepped onto the porch and called my friend Priya. "You're catering a 50-person party for free," she said, once I'd told her about the day. "You know what you'd charge a stranger for this?" I did know. I'd quoted something similar for a non-profit gala the month before. "Stand up tomorrow," Priya said. "Tell every guest exactly how many hours you've put into this weekend. Let them hear it." "That's what my mother would do," I said, before I'd even thought it through. And it was true. She was an expert at turning a room into an audience and making someone else defend themselves in it. If I gave a speech about my own exhaustion, I'd be using her playbook, and in her own house, with her own crowd, I'd lose. She'd cry, and the room would comfort her. "Promise me one thing," Priya said. "If she says something awful tomorrow, you don't argue. You walk." I told her I'd think about it. I stood on that porch a long time, telling myself one more day, and not yet realizing how much had already shifted inside me. Sunday, party day. Up again at 5, on 4 hours of sleep for the third night running. I piped rosettes around the cake with a steady hand, despite everything, because some stubborn part of me still believed that if I got the roses perfect enough, she might finally say the words I'd been waiting years to hear. She came down at 8, leaned in, squinted at my work. The roses are a little uneven on this side. Then she took her coffee to the porch. No good morning. No thank you for 18 hours in her kitchen. I adjusted roses that were already even. By noon, 50 guests filled the house. My mother stood at the door like a five-star hostess. Welcome, we've been cooking all weekend. I heard it from the kitchen, steam rising off the stove. An elderly neighbor complimented the spread directly to her face. She waved a hand and said, "Oh, you know me, I can't sit still." I stood 3 feet behind her holding a tray, and the neighbor's eyes slid past my mother and found mine. She held my gaze a beat too long. The look one woman gives another when she sees exactly what's happening and can't say so out loud. Nobody came to the kitchen all afternoon. Nobody asked if I needed water, or a chair, or 5 minutes. I watched it all through the window. My sister opening gifts, my father telling stories in a lawn chair, 50 people eating food I'd made while sitting in chairs I'd carried. It wasn't the labor I resented. It was disappearing in plain sight. During a lull, I opened my laptop again to finish the church reconciliation. The audit was due in 2 weeks. Scrolling through my mother's personal entries, the ones she'd made herself, between my visits, something snagged. Miscellaneous event supplies. $380. No receipt. Outreach materials. $290. No receipt. Event coordination. $450. No receipt. I filtered further. Roughly 40 entries she'd made directly. 14 had no documentation at all, vague categories, round numbers, everyone reimbursed to herself. About $2,200 total. It wasn't theft. I knew that. She likely had spent real money on real things, flowers, flyers, stamps, and simply never kept a receipt in her life. But to an outside auditor, 14 unexplained reimbursements to the campaign chair would raise immediate questions. Questions she could not answer, because she'd never learned how the answers worked. I had been answering them for her, quietly, for 3 years. I found her in the hallway between the kitchen and the party noise and told her, low and urgent, that we needed to talk about the books. Not now. We have guests. This isn't optional. If the audit committee sees unexplained. I handled it. Sharp. Final. The same voice she'd used on me at 13. You didn't handle it, I said. I handle it. Every year. And every year you stand in front of Walter's committee and present my work as if you did it yourself. Her face didn't soften. It hardened, cornered. Lower your voice. This is Hannah's day. And she walked back into the party, leaving me alone with the noise bleeding through the door. I'd tried. That mattered to me, even if it changed nothing. I needed to know later that I'd given her the chance. An hour later, Marcus rolled up his sleeves in the kitchen doorway. This is ridiculous. Let me take the grill. Relief hit me like cold water. Finally, someone offering hands instead of sympathy. Then Hannah appeared behind him as if summoned. Marcus, the Hendersons want to meet you. Come on. He glanced back at me, mouthed something close to sorry, and followed her out. 3 times that weekend, someone had moved toward helping me, and 3 times an invisible hand had steered them gently back to the party. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't laziness. It was a system my mother had built over decades, so quietly that no one, maybe not even her, could see the architecture of it. My labor was simply assumed, and anyone who threatened to disturb that assumption got redirected before they could. I flipped the burgers myself. The char marks came out perfect. No one would ever know whose hands had made them. Looking for serving spoons, I dug through the cluttered junk drawer by the fridge, expired coupons, dead batteries, an unopened birthday card 3 years old. My fingers caught on something folded small. A torn notepad page, in my mother's handwriting. Richard called. Partner position open for Claire. Told him she's decided to step back from accounting. January 14th. I read it 3 times before the words settled into something my brain could process, the way you reread a diagnosis hoping the second pass will say something different. January, 18 months ago. 2 months after I'd left my old firm, voluntarily, on good terms. Richard Hale was the founding partner. My mentor. The man who'd written my CPA recommendation letter. He'd called the house, the only landline on file from an old paperwork mix-up, to offer me a partnership. My mother had answered and told him I wasn't interested. I remembered calling Richard that summer, casually testing the waters. I thought you'd moved on from this line of work, he'd said. Your mother mentioned you decided to pursue other things. The call had lasted under 3 minutes. I'd never understood his coolness. Now I was holding the reason in my hand. I folded the note into my back pocket and finished serving cake with hands that didn't shake, while 50 guests sang happy birthday to a sister who had no idea what had just been found 4 feet away from her. I could have stood up right there, pulled the note out, said the words in front of everyone. You stole my career. I thought about it the whole rest of the night, but I kept landing on the same math. If I confronted her in that room, she'd cry, not faking it exactly, but turning a genuine feeling into a performance that redirected every ounce of sympathy back onto her. 50 guests would watch the unemployed daughter wave a piece of paper at her exhausted mother, and they'd comfort the woman with the tears. That's what rooms do. I needed a different kind of confrontation. One where the numbers did the talking and the audience wasn't mine to win over. I texted Priya, "You were right about everything." She wrote back, "About what?" I put the phone down and kept serving. The party ended around 8. Cars pulled away one by one. Hannah hugged everyone, me last, and meant every word of her thank you. That was the maddening part. She never once asked herself why all the gratitude pointed in one direction. My mother went to bed without looking at the kitchen. My father mumbled good night and shuffled off too. I was left with every surface coated in dried sauce, 50 chairs and 6 tables still standing in the yard, and citronella torches burning down to nothing. I washed dishes until the hot water gave out, then kept going in cold. Sometime after 11, I stepped away for a minute, and came back to find the last of it finished. Counter wiped. Slow cooker soaking. And propped against a clean plate on the drying rack, a yellow sticky note in my father's handwriting. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Dad." I stood there a long time holding it. 2 notes in one day. One a record of quiet sabotage hidden in a drawer. One a quiet apology, left where only I would find it. Both written by people who knew exactly what they were doing to me, and both written where no one else could see them being honest. Monday morning I sat on my old bed with the church ledger still open on my screen. 14 unreceipted entries. $2,200. 13 days until the audit. I'd done this dance 3 years running, quietly supplementing her sloppy entries with my own notes, cross-referencing event dates, building a paper trail that made her look organized. Hours of unpaid, invisible work, filed under someone else's name. I could do it a 4th time. Or I could stop. Not sabotage anything. Just stop supplementing. Pull my notes, my justifications, my cross-references, and leave her raw entries exactly as she'd made them. Vague, unexplained, hers. I wasn't going to destroy my mother. I was simply going to stop being her shield. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and started packing. I made it almost to the front door before she appeared in the hallway, as if she'd been listening for the sound of a zipper. "Where are you going?" "The yard still needs cleaning, and I told Mrs. Whitfield you'd drop off her serving bowls today." "I have client work," Mom. I need to go home. Client work, she repeated, like I'd said imaginary friend. Your little computer thing can wait. This is family. I should have walked out the door right then. My hand was already on the handle. But Mrs. Whitfield was 78 and had asked specifically, and my mother knew, without ever needing to say it outright, that I wasn't the kind of person who'd let an old woman wait on her own request. That was the whole mechanism. She never had to order anyone to do anything. She just routed every demand through someone you couldn't bring yourself to disappoint, and watched you fold. I delivered the bowls. Mrs. Whitfield's kitchen smelled like coffee and lemon polish. She set the bowls down without inspecting them, proof she hadn't really needed them back that day, and poured me a cup before I'd even sat. You look like you've been running someone else's marathon, she said. Mom helped, I said automatically. She gave me a look over her glasses, the kind that comes from decades of knowing exactly when someone is protecting a lie. Honey, I've known your mother 30 years. Helen doesn't cook. She conducts. I watched you through that kitchen window all afternoon yesterday. Alone. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug and said nothing. I kept books for 40 years, she went on. County office, then private clients. You know what I learned? The person doing the numbers is invisible, right up until the numbers go wrong. Then everybody suddenly remembers her name. She topped off my cup without asking. Don't let them make you invisible, dear. You're worth more than that. I drove home with the windows down, no longer angry. Something colder and steadier had replaced it. I was clear. At my desk that afternoon, I smoothed the note flat and called Richard. Claire. It's been a while. Richard, last January, did you call my parents' house about a position? A pause, the kind people take when choosing words carefully. I did. Partner track. We were impressed with your retention numbers. Your mother said you decided to step away from accounting. I didn't push. I figured it was your call to make. I never got that message. She never told me. The silence that followed had weight to it. Claire, I don't know what to say. The position filled in March. I understand, I said, steady, professional. Is anything open now? Not partner track. But I have a senior consultant role, solid salary, clear path forward. Given what you've just told me, I'd like to meet this week. I'll be there. I hung up and sat in the afternoon light, traffic humming below my window. For the first time in 18 months, a hallway I believed dead-ended at a wall had a door in it. Not the same door, but a door, and I'd found it myself. The following Sunday I went to family dinner, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to watch the machine run from the outside, now that I understood how its gears turned. I brought a store-bought pie, label still on it. My mother's eyebrows rose. She said nothing, which was its own kind of confession. Conversation drifted the usual directions until Marcus, reaching for the bread, asked how the freelance work was going. Before I could answer, my mother cut in, smooth and practiced. Claire's still figuring things out. A sip of wine. Then, to him specifically, with the same flat certainty she'd used in her own kitchen, she's the only one without a real job, but she keeps busy. The table went quiet. Marcus studied his plate. Hannah turned her wine glass like it held an answer. My father looked at the wall behind my head. I set my fork down carefully, the way you put down something fragile when you've decided you're done carrying it. I need to get going. Thanks for dinner. You just got here, my mother said. Not worried. Annoyed. I let the door click shut behind me, no slam, just a latch settling into place. I sat in their driveway, engine off, and called Priya first. She did it again, I said. In front of Marcus. Are you going to use the note? Tell them about Richard. No. Then what? I watched a moth knock itself stupid against the porch light. I'm going to stop doing the job she keeps telling people I don't have. I hung up and dialed Walter. Walter, it's Claire. I'm sorry to call on a Sunday. Effective today, I'm stepping down from managing the capital campaign books. A pause on his end. I also need to flag something for the committee, roughly $2,200 in expenses across 3 years with no receipts or documentation. I've been supplementing those entries with my own notes. I'll be removing them when I hand the files over. You'll want the committee to review the raw ledger before the annual meeting. A long silence, the sound of a careful man recalculating. Claire, I appreciate the transparency. Should I speak to Helen about this? You should, I said. She's the chair. Priya showed up that night with wine I hadn't asked for and an opinion I hadn't requested either. We sat on my tiny balcony, looking at the brick wall of the building next door. You have the note, she said. You have the ledger. You could lay it all out at the next dinner. Read it to Hannah word for word. I've thought about it, I said. And it's exactly what my mother would do. Put someone on trial in front of an audience with no warning, force them to defend themselves in real time. She's spent 30 years perfecting that move. If I do the same thing, different target, I'm just using her weapon. Then what was calling Walter? Walter's the treasurer. Reviewing the books is literally his job. I gave him accurate information and pulled my unpaid work out of the equation. If her entries can stand without me propping them up, she'll be fine. If they can't, I shrugged. That's not mine to carry anymore. That's not revenge, Priya said slowly. That's just math. I'm an accountant, I said. Same thing. I found out Tuesday that Walter had already paid the house a visit, because Hannah called sounding like she was trying very hard to ask a question without revealing how much she already suspected. Something's wrong with Mom. Some man from the church came by. She's been awful ever since. Walter's the treasurer. If he came by, it's about the fundraiser. She said you sabotaged her. I let that sit a moment. Sabotage, for removing my own unpaid labor from someone else's books. I resigned from a volunteer position, Hannah. That's not sabotage. This feels bigger than church accounting. It was the first time she'd pushed. The first time she'd sensed there was a floor under the floor. Ask Mom about a note in the junk drawer, I said. January 14th. Her handwriting. What note? Ask Mom. I hung up. Not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. I'd spent 33 years investigating, compiling, translating hard truths into easy ones for people who never asked to understand until the bill came due. If Hannah wanted the truth, she could open the drawer herself. She did, the next day. She told me about it later, in pieces, over a lunch neither of us had eaten at before. The drawer had been emptied, wiped clean, relined, my mother's instinct for damage control already at work. Hannah nearly gave up there. But something in my voice on the phone had left a crack she couldn't ignore, so she kept looking. Trash bin. Recycling. The shredding bag under the sink. She found it crumpled between a credit card statement and a furniture store flyer. She walked into the living room holding it. Mom, what is this? My mother's face went pale, then deep red. The look of someone watching a wall she'd spent years reinforcing finally give way. Where did you find that? In the trash. You threw it away. She wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility, Hannah. She'd just left her firm. She needed time. You decided that. Without telling her. I'm her mother. I know what's best. Is that why you keep calling her unemployed? Because you made sure she stayed that way. My mother started to cry then, the kind of crying built to fill a room and demand attention. But Hannah, for the first time in 36 years of deferring, didn't reach for the tissues. She just stood there, holding the note, and let the silence answer for itself. My phone rang 4 times that evening. I let every call go to voicemail. A text arrived, "Call me right now." I read it, set the phone face down, and went back to a client's quarterly filing. She called Hannah next, demanding she make me pick up. "I told her to call you herself," Hannah said when she told me about it later, sounding like someone who'd finally been handed glasses and could see the machinery she'd lived inside her whole life. And to explain the note while she was at it. "It was one phone call, Hannah. I was protecting her." Protecting her from what? A partnership? A real salary? She cooks your meals, does your taxes, runs your church's books, and you torpedoed her career and then told 50 people she's unemployed. "The church books are fine," my mother said. "I handled it." But the tremor underneath the words told a different story. Thursday, Walter sent an email, measured, professional, the tone of a man who knew how to deliver bad news in careful language. Addressed to my mother. Copied to the pastor and 2 committee elders. Subject line: Capital Campaign, Expedited Review. Given discrepancies flagged by the outgoing volunteer bookkeeper, the audit would move up, this Saturday, not in 2 weeks. All records and receipts to be prepared. My mother called at 7 the next morning. I picked up, because this was a professional matter now, and I answered professional calls. "You need to fix this," she said, voice raw. "Put your notes back. The audit's Saturday." "Those notes were my professional work, Mom. The same work you told 50 people I don't do." "This is the church, Claire. The raw ledger is accurate. If your expenses are legitimate, you'll have no trouble explaining them to Walter and the committee." "I can't explain them. I don't have the receipts." "You always," she stopped herself, hearing the sentence she'd almost finished out loud, "you always took care of it." She'd nearly confessed, to the daughter she called jobless, that the daughter's invisible job was the only thing standing between her and this exact moment. "Yes," I said quietly. "I always did." Silence. Her breathing, uneven, on the other end. The sound of a woman realizing the shield she'd mocked for 18 months was the only thing that had ever stood between her and the arrow. "If you'd like to hire me as a professional bookkeeper for the audit response," I said, "my rate is $75 an hour. Same as my other clients. The ones who give me real work." I hung up the way you close a finished ledger. Saturday I stayed home, working on Priya's tax filing, steady, useful, paid. I decided not to go to the church. This wasn't my performance to attend. I'd built the stage and placed the actors. What happened on it now belonged to the numbers, not to me. Walter called that afternoon, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a man reporting facts he wished were different. The committee had reviewed the raw ledger. 14 flagged entries. No receipts. Roughly $2,200 reimbursed to the chair herself. They'd asked her to explain. She'd tried. "I handled it. I've always handled the fundraiser." He said she repeated it several times, each time with less conviction, until it sounded less like a defense and more like an echo with nowhere left to land. Nobody accused her of theft. Walter was careful about that. They believed she'd genuinely spent her own money on legitimate things. But the documentation simply didn't exist, and trust, in a small church committee, runs on paperwork as much as faith. They asked her to step down as chair pending a full reconciliation. She could stay on the committee. She could keep attending. But the title, the authority, the front row seat she'd built her whole retirement identity around, that was gone. "Claire," Walter said carefully, "did you know this would happen when you stepped back?" "I knew that without me cleaning up the books would show exactly what they are." "And you still resigned." "Someone has to do it right, Walter. And someone has to let the wrong things finally be seen." That afternoon my phone lit up with Hannah's name, and what came through was the sound this story opened with, sobbing past the point of fixing. "Mom just got back from the church," she said. She's on the floor in the living room. She keeps saying I handled it. Dad's just standing there. What did you do? I stopped handling it for her, I said. That's what happened. Why now? Why like this? Ask her about January 14th. Ask her what she told Richard Hale when he called about a partnership for me. Ask her how she spent 3 years presenting my numbers to that committee, then stood in her own kitchen and told 50 people I don't have a real job. Hannah went quiet for a long time. In the background, underneath everything, I could hear my mother, not the polished hostess voice, not the thin, pitying smile. Something raw. The sound of a woman whose audience had finally seen behind the curtain. The note, Hannah said finally, small and cracked. Claire, I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. You're seeing it now, I said. That was enough. My mother called that evening. I answered because there was nothing left to protect. Not her reputation, not my own patience, not the comfortable fiction that our family worked the way families were supposed to. Are you happy now? Her voice was hollowed out. No, Mom. I haven't been happy in a long time. I was trying to protect you. You weren't ready. You were protecting yourself, I said quietly. No heat in it, just the closing line of an 18-month audit. If I'd succeeded entirely on my own, it would have meant you could have too. And you couldn't live with that question. She didn't deny it. The silence where a defense should have been told me more than any confession could have. I love you, Mom. But I'm done being invisible just so you can feel seen. I hung up and looked at the evening light falling across my spreadsheets, my client folders, and the CPA certificate I'd taken off her dusty shelf and hung on my own wall. The glass was clean now. I'd wiped it myself. 3 months later I sat in a conference room at Hale & Associates and signed an offer letter. Senior consultant. A real salary. Benefits. A desk by a window that looked out over the green downtown, not the corner office, but close enough to watch the trees change color. Richard shook my hand and said something I still carry. We should have tried harder to reach you. That's on us too. I didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. It wasn't. But I'd stopped keeping that particular ledger. My mother was removed as campaign chair. The church appointed a retired school principal with a filing system that made Walter smile for the first time in months, and hired a part-time bookkeeper, paid, from the operating budget. The $2,200 eventually got reconciled, some receipts surfaced, some personal checks were written, and a letter of explanation arrived that Walter described as sincere but insufficient. She wasn't asked to leave the church, but she stopped arriving early, stopped sitting up front. The congregation noticed, the way congregations always do, with polite silence and averted eyes. My father called twice in those 3 months, short and careful, a man walking across ice he wasn't sure would hold. He never apologized again out loud. But the second call, when I told him my new salary, he said, "I'm proud of you, kiddo," and his voice broke on the last word. It wasn't enough to undo 33 years of silence. But it was everything Ray had left to give. Hannah took me to lunch on neutral ground and cried into her salad. I never asked, she admitted, because I assumed everything was fine. I'm not assuming anymore. She started doing her own taxes that spring. Marcus texted a week later, "For what it's worth, I should have tried harder with those burgers." I texted back, "You should have." I used to believe strength meant staying, showing up at 5 a.m., cooking for 50, smiling while someone reduced my life's work to a hobby. I thought if I worked hard enough, quietly enough, eventually they'd see me. That isn't strength. That's a transaction where you keep paying and no one ever checks the bill. Real strength is knowing exactly what your work is worth, and deciding, finally, who's allowed to have it for free. A note in a junk drawer. A birthday cake no one thanked me for. One phone call that changed which woman in that family the church actually trusted with its money. That's where this story ends, for now. If you've ever done the invisible work while somebody else took the bow, you know exactly what I mean. The quiet ones always keep the better records.